Hi guys, it's Brooke. Welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be a super quick, chatty video directed towards you crochet pattern designers. Today I'm going to be talking about how to make your patterns lefty friendly. If you're curious about the sweater I'm wearing, I made it from Emma at Made in the Moment's Knit Raglan YouTube tutorial. I 1000% would recommend. I've made like 5 of them so far. Super easy, quick, and fun. No, I have not sewn in my ends. They will be torturing you the entire video. Good luck. So I know that making patterns lefty friendly is kind of a scary topic for lots of right-handed crocheters, so I'm going to break it down into 3 basic rules that you should follow. Number 1, anything you can do, I can do, but backwards. Number 2, symmetry is key. And number 3, color work. Color work is just going to be its whole separate rule because it's very confusing, which we'll get to later. I want to mention that the majority of these conditions that you should keep in mind may not apply to most pattern designers. If you're someone who makes simple pieces like simple basic sweaters, simple scarves, things that don't involve a lot of color work, things that don't involve a multitude of stitches, things that don't involve a multitude of techniques, this video you probably don't need. Your stuff is probably fine. So starting off with number 1, anything you can do, I can do, but backwards. So I'm going to put in some videos right now of me doing a simple chain and then single crocheting from a left-handed perspective and a right-handed perspective. Bear with me for the right-handed version. I'm not a righty, so I'm going to do the best I can. But as you can see, the chain starts off pretty similar, but the minute you start single crocheting, you can see that lefties single crochet from left to right and righties single crochet from right to left. If in your pattern you said to start with 3 double crochets and end with 3 single crochets, I would be doing that, but it would be on the opposite side. So this rule of just keeping in mind that I work things backwards from the way right-handed crocheters work things is what leads us into rule number 2 to keep in mind. Symmetry is key. So essentially, everything that I've said up until now, just to keep in mind, doesn't apply when things are symmetrical. So if you start with 3 double crochets and then end with 3 double crochets, it doesn't matter because it's going to be the same left or right. And you can see this in some of the patterns that I've made. For example, my sunset triangle cardigan has color work, but because it's symmetrical color work, it doesn't matter. It works the same for both lefties and righties. Now, this rule of symmetry applies for everything. It applies for color work itself, like my sunset cardigan. It applies for working stitches, like I said, if you're going to start and end with 3 double crochets. And it also works with increases and decreases. So if you need someone to increase or decrease specifically on one side, you're going to have an issue with lefties and righties. An added layer to the symmetry effect is right and wrong facing. So on my last example, I said if you wanted someone to increase or decrease on one specific side, we would have an issue. The way that lefties circumvent this issue is by flipping the right and wrong side. So for example, if in a pattern, you had it where righties decreased on the right side, so therefore I'm decreasing and lefties are decreasing on the left side, all I would do would be to flip my work so that the right side becomes the wrong side, and therefore my increase is now on the correct side, aka the right side. I know this is confusing, but basically all I'm saying is that we work around unsymmetrical patterns by flipping our work over. For the most part, I have no issue flipping my work to be right or wrong facing depending on what's supposed to work in the pattern. The only time I do have an issue is if there's color work. But if there's no color work, it could be a project with a bunch of increases, a bunch of decreases, a bunch of different stitch types. It's usually 100% fine. For the most part, symmetry doesn't have much of an effect with stitch type. It more affects color work itself because for color work, you could have extremely intricate designs. But for stitch work, usually, for the most part, people have different stitches in a full row. Therefore, symmetry doesn't play a part because usually you'll do like 5 rows of single crochet, 4 rows of, the bobble stitch, and then 3 rows of half double crochet. And so all of that works for both lefties and righties. Where it does come into play, for example, is my wavy sweater. So for my wavy sweater, I have a very intricate pattern design, the waves themselves, but because it's symmetrical, there's an even amount of waves throughout the panel. It works perfectly for both lefties and righties. I think if I remember correctly, it's a pattern repeat of 12 stitches. So I just made sure that I had a full repeat on the beginning and on the end to make sure that everyone could work my pattern. Projects that are worked in panels and then sewn together, the assembly itself doesn't have an impact on lefties or righties. But where you might find impacts is when you have a project where you're assembling it as you go. So for example, I think a year ago, I tested for my friend Ashley Tiny Couch Crochet, her no-sew comfort tee. So if I remember correctly, the way this tee worked is you worked up the back and then you increased on one side to create the neckline on one side, increased it on the other side, and then joined them together and then kept going down the front. Now, when we were working this, she was unsure and had concerns about whether the pattern would work well for me. And the pattern ended up working fine for me. It's just that her first front panel that she wanted you to work on was the right side. And for me, I ended up working on the left side. I worked on the left side and went to the right side instead of starting with the right and then moving to the left. But now we make it to our third rule, color work, which is its own beast. When I was first trying to figure out how color work worked for righties and lefties, I worked a lot with my friend Aiden Wells Crochet, and Destiny Makes. Us three had FaceTime calls. We were just trying to figure it out together because when I first started doing color work, I didn't understand why right-handed patterns didn't work for me. Destiny ended up posting really great information on her Instagram story, essentially explaining why lefties and righties can't crochet the same way when it comes to color work. And the reason why is because our crochet stitches lean. So if you pull up a project that you have in front of you right now and you look at your stitches, you'll find that on some rows they lean to the right and on some rows they lean to the left, which is why if you've ever done vertical stripes on crochet, you'll see that it's difficult and it doesn't line up properly. So for any of you that want to make a graph that works well for lefties and righties, I'm going to read the rules out to you real quick. So for left-handed crocheters, your odd rows are going to be your wrong side rows, and your even rows are going to be your right side rows. Now it's going to be the opposite for righties. The even rows are going to be the wrong side, and the odd rows are going to be the right side. Now when it comes to color work, we have something called shifting. Essentially all that means is basically you're increasing the amount of red stitches in the following row. So this is what it looks like to shift to the right, and this is what it looks like to shift to the left. So when you're doing color work, there are rules on when you can shift. And the reason why there are these rules is because the stitches face a certain way. So if your stitches are facing to the right and you're trying to shift to the left, it's gonna look like there's a gap because the stitches are facing the wrong way. So you wanna make sure to only shift with the direction of your stitches. So again, I'm gonna read out the rules for you for shifting. So for left-handed crocheters, you're gonna shift left on the odd rows and you're gonna shift right on the even rows. And again, this is going to be the opposite for right-handed crocheters, who are going to shift right on the odd rows and shift left on the even rows. What I have learned more recently while making these graphs is that a right-handed graph that works perfectly for righties, including when to shift, when to not shift, if you mirror that perfect right-handed color work graph for lefties, it'll work perfectly as well. So essentially what I've started doing is creating a graph following either the lefty or the right-handed rules, depending on what I want to do. And then when it's done, all I do is mirror it and it works perfectly for the others. So for this section, I do want to clarify that your left-handed graph is going to be backwards. It's going to look backwards on the chart. Don't freak out. I promise when you start working on it, you'll see that it turns out to be normal, just like the right-handed graph. It's just because we're basically looking at the back of the chart in this graph. I end up doing all my graphs this way, so in all of my patterns that have graphs, the left-handed graph always appears to be backwards, but when you work it up, it ends up being totally fine. So most recently I made this Texas A&M graph, and what I did is I added the logo to my graph, and as you can see, it reads normally left to right. Then I went in and added right-handed color changing rules to make sure you're shifting right only on the odd rows, shifting left only on the even rows. And then once that was done, I mirrored the whole thing, and then I had a perfect lefty graph. So that's really all the points I wanted to make today. I really wanted to hone in on the fact that color work is its own beast. And if you have any questions on how to do color work, please let me know. It's extremely confusing. Every time I make a color work graph, I have to try it out multiple times because it's just difficult to get right the first time. All right, so these were all my tips on how to make your crochet pattern perfect for lefties. I just want to summarize it again. Number one, everything you can do, I can do, but backwards. So if you're starting a project, you're working right to left and I'm working left to right. So just keep that in mind. Number two, symmetry is key. You don't have to pay attention to any of these rules I talked about as long as your project is symmetrical. If it's not symmetrical, keep in mind lefties are going to be doing the opposite of what you want them to do. In order to counteract that, what you can do is ask them to flip their right and wrong side of work, which usually works just fine if you don't have any color work. But if you do have color work, that's not going to work, so you have to follow the color work rules that I described in this video. Thanks for watching this little chatty video. If y'all have any other questions on how to make your patterns work for left-handed crocheters, just let me know. And of course, if you're a left-handed crocheter and you're here just to watch, welcome to my channel. I've got a bunch of tutorials that work great for lefties, so go check them out.